Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another Halloween video and the conclusion of this case, Adam, the boy in the Thames. I know it's only been a few days, but let's do a quick recap of what happened in part 1. So on September 21st, 2001, the torso of a young boy was pulled from the River Thames in London. His head, arms, and legs had been expertly removed, and he was wearing only orange shorts made by the clothing company Kids & Company. The orange shorts were tracked down to a batch of 820 pairs that had been sold at Woolworth stores in Germany, but the trail went cold there. However, today I'm going to explain the orange shorts connection and what they connect to. The Metropolitan Police named this unknown young boy Adam, and they got to work trying to figure out who he was and where he came from. And due to some really great police work and some insanely cool forensics tests, they were able to determine that Adam had been born in Benin City in the African country of Nigeria, and he'd only been in the UK for a short time before he had been killed. Due to his wounds, the fact that he had been placed into the river after his murder, and the combination of ingredients found in his stomach that indicated he'd been fed a potion of some sorts that was intended to paralyze him before he was killed, investigators and experts began to realize that Adam had been killed for the purposes of human sacrifice. The next step was to figure out who had transported Adam from his Benin City home to the foggy streets of London and who was responsible for his gruesome death. And that is what we are going to talk about today. But first, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Magellan TV. I know that October is over, but that doesn't have to mean that spooky season is over. In fact, I'm going to leave Dale Cooper, my little skeleton guy over there, I'm going to leave them there. The skeleton on the wall and the little dude sitting on the salt lamp because I like them. And you all know spooky season goes through November, and on that note, I would like you to check out the Ultimate Halloween playlist on Magellan TV. The playlist has all sorts of spooky contents from ghosts to cryptids to witches. The film War on Witches is one I definitely suggest you watch because it goes back to the 16th century when Europe was in the grip of witch hunt fever and thousands were tortured and burnt at the stake throughout France and Germany. It's actually a great supplemental film to watch that I think kind of ties back to today's case, and the moral of the story is sometimes superstition and extreme beliefs can be very dangerous. And new documentaries just like this are being added to Magellan TV every single week, on top of the 3,000 documentary films and series that are already available. They have a great true crime collection which you can get started watching. They have the best documentary films and series from around the world, and no matter what you're interested in, you're sure to find more than enough to watch on Magellan TV because it is truly television worth watching, meant to both entertain and educate. I just drove to and from Boston in basically a 24-hour period. So it was essentially 12 hours on the road, 6 hours each way. And I watched the Halloween playlist on Magellan TV most of the way back because I just got bored of listening to music and I was by myself and I didn't want to be left alone with my own thoughts, you know what I mean? But it was super interesting, so it made the drive back go really quick. You can watch Magellan TV on your phone, tablet, or computer, or you can stream it on Apple TV, Roku, Google Chrome, the list goes on. It's getting colder and darker outside, so curl up with a good documentary from Magellan TV and a nice hot drink and spend these gray days and chilly nights being endlessly entertained. Right now, viewers of my channel can click on the link in the description box and start a 1-month free trial with no strings attached. You can cancel anytime. You're not tied into anything. It's really that easy. Thank you so much to Magellan TV for sponsoring today's video, and let's get started. Okay, so once the detectives had identified Adam's birthplace and they'd gained a better understanding of how he had died and why, they began to comb London and the surrounding communities, keeping their ear to the ground for whispers about human sacrifice amongst the communities. It was then that they began to realize that the practice of bringing a child to the country specifically for the purposes of sacrifice was far more common than they had originally thought, and Adam was not the only one, not by far. Detective Inspector Will O'Reilly told the media, quote, "We've uncovered what we believe is a criminal network concentrating on people trafficking. We don't know how many children are involved in this operation, but it is certainly in the hundreds, if not the thousands, coming from mainland Africa through Europe and into the UK." End quote. The investigators who had been working hard on Adam's case, they didn't know it, but over 400 miles away in Glasgow, something was being set into motion that would jumpstart their investigation into what had happened to little Adam. In July of 2002, social services in Glasgow had become involved with a family after they'd received reports that a woman named Joyce Azajide was struggling to care for her 2 young daughters. According to Detective Nick Chalmers, quote, her 2 daughters were taken into care because there were suggestions she had become involved with prostitution once she arrived in Glasgow. The police went to her house and found the kids were not being cared for and they were taken to a place of safety, end quote. When the social workers entered her home, they found some strange objects, like whiskey bottles stuffed full with chicken feathers. Now, the previous December, this woman, Joyce, had presented herself to immigration officials in Croydon, and she'd told them that she was from Sierra Leone and that she and her daughters were in Scotland seeking asylum. But it was very likely that Joyce had been in the UK, or at least in Europe, for some time before she paid a visit to immigration. Joyce also claimed to the immigration officers that she'd been a part of a cult called the Black Coat Eyes of the Devil Guru Maharaj, and her husband and the father of her children was a leader in this group, and he had taken part in many rituals and human sacrifices, including the ritual murders of 11 children. According to Joyce, one of these children had been Joyce's oldest son, whose father had murdered him in 1995 for the purposes of gaining some sort of power for their group. Joyce claimed that she had left the group when she realized how evil they were. So apparently the magic number for Joyce to show her that someone was evil is 11. 11 child murders before you realize your cult's bad news. But she realized they were evil. And now that Joyce had left the fold, her life and the lives of her children were in danger, so she had been relocated to Glasgow, and the government found her a flat on the south side of the city. So in July of 2002, her 2 daughters had been removed from her care, but the following December, Joyce showed up at the social services office with a bizarre request. It was December 31st. This is a holiday in Scotland called Hogmanay, which is a Scottish word for the last day of the year. So basically, it's like New Year's Eve. The roots of Hogmanay are thought to reach back to the Norse celebrations of the winter solstice, and it is celebrated with many customs, one of which being the first footing. So first footing starts right after midnight, and it involves the first person to step over the threshold of a home to bring symbolic gifts to the family that resided there. And these gifts were specifically chosen to bring luck to the household in the coming year. The first footing is supposed to set the tone for the new year, and traditionally, a tall, dark-haired man would be preferred as the first foot. I wish that a tall, dark-haired man would show up at my door bearing gifts. So Joyce Ozajide walked into the social work department and said she desperately needed her children back. Not because she was feeling nostalgic and wanted to celebrate the new year with them, not because she missed them, and she wanted to know that on the evening of New Year's Eve they were sleeping in their own beds. No, it was none of that. It was because she needed them for a ritual that was to take place at her house that evening. She literally said exactly that to these shocked social workers who were looking at each other like, did you just hear that? Am I hallucinating? Did this woman legit just walk up in here demanding her daughters back so they could be used for a ritual? So once these social workers had sort of regained their composure, they asked Joyce, is this ritual that you want to perform connected to the cult that you are allegedly here in Scotland fleeing from? And she responded, yes. Needless to say, Joyce's children were not returned to her care. Instead, officials took her to court in an attempt to get an order of protection for the 2 girls, stating that their mother legally was ordered to stay away from them. A local police officer who was in court the day this order was granted made a connection between Joyce, her cult, and her rituals, and the case of Adam, the boy in the Thames. So he contacted the detectives on Adam's case in London to let them know that their next clue might be bringing them to Glasgow. Detective Nick Chalmers visited Joyce at her home, and the first thing that he did was he requested a DNA sample, thinking that she might be the biological mother of Adam, but she initially refused this DNA sample. They would later get a DNA sample from her, and at that point it was discovered that she was not related to Adam. Detective Chalmers said, quote, My first thoughts were that I was going to see a woman who may have suffered a similar fate to the parents of our victim. If she was familiar with human sacrifice, the motives behind it, and the effects it had on families, then it might help us understand. After all, it appeared that she had a child about the same age as our victim, who had been ritually killed." End quote. But Joyce was not acting like a grieving mother, nor was she really acting like an innocent woman. She was being sus as hell, and the answers she gave were very short, with little detail. She was very withholding. Detective Chalmers said, quote, "Frankly, she was not as cooperative as you would expect from someone who was a victim. She refused to give a DNA sample. She wouldn't go into detail about her own son's death, but she did talk in general terms about ritualistic practices, and it became quite clear that she was very familiar with these practices." End quote. So Detective Chalmers, he's not getting what he wants from Joyce. So he kind of began to walk around her apartment, scan the flat around them, looking for something that might provide further information. And he saw an envelope that contained a Blockbuster card sitting next to Joyce's purse. He memorized the address, and this place was in Catford, London. When detectives knocked at the door of this address and a woman answered, she said she didn't know who Joyce Azajide was. But when she was shown a picture of Joyce, it jogged her memory. The woman who lived at that residence said she remembered Joyce knocking on her door one night looking for a pastor who did not live there. Apparently, Joyce had spent a few minutes with the woman inside the house. They were sort of chatting. At that point, she must have swiped the Blockbuster envelope out of this woman's apartment, hoping to be able to use it to set up a false identity. And she chatted with this woman about how she had lived in Germany for a while before coming to London. And there it was, finally, the Germany connection. The one piece of evidence police had been able to pursue had been those dark orange shorts that Adam was wearing when he'd been pulled from the River Thames. The shorts had been placed on Adam after his death. And they knew this, obviously, because he had been dismembered, his limbs, his legs, so you couldn't have done that when those shorts were on, and usually these ritual sacrifices would have been done while he was completely nude. So whoever had done this to him had redressed him in those shorts before disposing of his body in the river. Now, those shorts were only sold throughout Germany, and prior to this, the police had no idea why Germany was important, but now they had some hint. Armed with this new information, the police returned to Joyce's flat with a search warrant, and there they found several sets of children's clothing, all made by the brand Kids & Company. Joyce said that the clothes had belonged to her daughters, and she had purchased them at Woolworths in Germany. And this was also important because it turned out that the orange shorts Adam had been wearing, they were made for little girls, not little boys. And the Kids & Company clothes found in Joyce's flat were all in sizes 4 to 7, the same size as Adam's shorts.
We searched her flat in Scotland and we found clothing from the same company, indeed with the same size, as worn by the child we now know as Adam. That was very significant for us.
There's a lot of clothes here, and they're obviously your children's clothes. Where were they bought, most of those?
I bought some from Germany, and this one's at second hand. This one is from my relative.
Nick? Yeah. So I'll be back in a sec, Jobson.
Same company. Different size.
Those clothes there, do you remember the shop that you bought them from? Woolworths.
Joyce was placed under arrest and brought from Glasgow to London for further questioning. And while this was happening, a smaller group of detectives traveled to Germany to find out what Joyce Azajide had been up to when she lived there. They found out that Joyce was not from Sierra Leone at all. She had lied to the immigration officers. She was actually from Benin City, Nigeria, and it was discovered that she'd been living in Germany up until a few days before she showed up at the immigration office in Croydon. In fact, Joyce Azajide wasn't even her real name. She had been living under multiple aliases in multiple different countries. Detectives back in London had found this out when they went to the addresses of 3 different flats that Joyce had been connected to in London. Joyce was known to stay at a flat in South London that was in her name, but she'd also been known to spend some time at a flat in the East End of London, and that flat was in the name of somebody called Kingsley Ojo, a man police knew to be connected to Joyce, since his contact information was one of only 2 numbers that she had stored in her cell phone. but no one was at this flat when they arrived. At Joyce's flat in South London, they found multiple forged documents, including fake British and Nigerian passports. They also found a lot of plane tickets, like a lot of plane tickets, way more than one person would need, probably way more than 10 people would need. And it turns out that Joyce's real name was Omove Bayi Joyce Arabert, born June 14, 1971 in Benin City. A videotape was also found in her flat, and on it was written the title, Wedding of Joyce Arabert to Samuel Onojahayovi, dated February 1997. So in this video, is Joyce getting married to this dude, Samuel, and you can see the sacrifice of a live goat performed in real time, captured as part of the wedding ceremony. Believe me, we are going to get to Kenneth Ojo and Samuel Onojahayovi as soon as possible. Just give us a couple minutes. We're going to talk about these two men. Don't let me forget. But Joyce had also been using a different fake name while she'd been living in Germany. So this woman clearly has a lot going on that she's not being upfront about. In London, while she was under arrest, Joyce talked to police but changed her story multiple times and made claims that were quickly proven to be false. At first, she said she had been living in Germany with her estranged husband until 2001, at which point she'd taken her daughters and fled to London. She then changed her story, claiming she had never lived in Germany and she'd taken a ship straight from Lagos in Nigeria to London. Joyce said that she didn't know anything about Adam and she had not been taking care of any little boys. When police asked her about her estranged husband, she didn't want to say much, but she did say his name was Samuel Onojahayovi and that he was a high-up leader in that cult, the Black Coat Eyes of the Devil Guru Maharaj. Now, according to the London Times, this cult was a subsect of a legitimate religious group called the Divine Light Mission, or DLM. DLM was apparently founded in 1960 in India by a guru named Hans Maharaj, and the religion had 5 commandments. Never put off until tomorrow what you can do today, constantly meditate and remember the holy name, leave no room for doubt in the mind, never delay attending satsang, which is religious instruction, and always have faith in God. The movement gained momentum in the West under the leadership of the guru's 4th and youngest son, Prem Rawat, and it became seen as a new and attractive religious movement, which was very appealing to many people. In 1971, Prem Rawat traveled to the UK and the US, where he set up branches of DLM, and by 1973, DLM had over 1 million followers in India and tens of thousands in the West. Initially, the Black Coat cult had called themselves DLM in order to appear legitimate, and it was created by a man named Mohammed Saib. Saib was born in Ghana, but had moved to Nigeria in the 1970s when he was in his 20s. In 1975, he moved to London, entering illegally, and that was where he was introduced to DLM and its teachings. When he returned to Nigeria in 1980, he declared that he was the true and rightful Maharaj. Mohammed Saib gained a small amount of loyal and rabid followers, and when DLM, the actual DLM, caught on to what they were doing and using their name to do it, they renounced them. So Saib renamed his group the Black Coat Eyes of the Devil Guru Maharaj. Their cult's sacred color was orange, and Saib himself was always decked out in long orange robes. His followers called him Black Jesus and Perfect Living Master, and they created over 30 cult compounds around Nigeria, at which point locals living around these compounds began to complain about incidences of torture and ritual murder. So Joyce is telling the police that her husband, Samuel, was a pretty prominent member in this group, a group that she had admitted took part in the ritual sacrifice of multiple children. The police speculated that Joyce had most likely not been directly involved with or present for Adam's murder because she was in Germany until December of 2001. They'd also discovered that her 2 daughters had been attending a preschool in Hamburg for a short time during the month of September 2001. Social services in Germany had also discovered the true origins of Joyce Ozajide, if that is her real name, which it turns out it's not. Joyce and her daughters had arrived in Germany by way of Italy in 1992 to join her husband Samuel, who had arrived the year before. So it looks like she hadn't really been running from him, had she? Seemed more like she was running to him. Both their daughters had been born in Germany, the first in 1997, the second in 1999. Joyce's first child, a son, had been born in Nigeria, and he was reported to have died in 1995, which did line up with the initial story she told the Glasgow police of her husband killing the boy during a ritual sacrifice in 1995. The authorities also tracked down a woman in Hamburg named Frau Dibbern after they had uncovered that this woman had fostered Joyce's daughters after they'd been placed in temporary care by their mother. Frau Dibbern said that the two girls had shown up to her home looking disheveled and neglected, but the older daughter was often found to be wearing a pair of orange shorts. And when Frau Dibbern was presented with Adam's shorts, she confirmed that they were the same ones she'd seen Joyce's daughter wearing. Frau Dibbern said the last time she'd seen the girl wearing the shorts was in September of 2001, the same month Adam was found in the Thames. Almost 20 years later, another woman would be tracked down that is believed to have been one of the last people to see Adam alive. Her name is Rita Mates, and she was a social worker who'd been tasked with assessing Joyce's benefit claims while she was living in Hamburg. So essentially, Joyce leaves Africa. She comes to Germany essentially seeking asylum, seeking refuge. Once she's granted this asylum, once she's granted this refuge, she can now apply for public benefits. She can apply for government money, which she did, and she was given it. But you have to have somebody go in every so often and just sort of like reevaluate, whether you should be getting those benefits or not. So Rhea, she was the one who was tasked with doing this for Joyce and her family. And Rhea said that Joyce lived in a high-rise building in a flat that was filled with expensive leather furniture and flat-screen televisions, along with tons of very pricey AV equipment like video cameras and computers. Now, Rhea knew that these items could not have been purchased with the money the German government was giving Joyce as an asylum seeker, so Rhea knew that Joyce must have quite a bit of income coming in from someplace else. Additionally, every month Joyce was required to visit Rhea's office, and this is when she's going to say, yeah, I'm looking for a job, or I had a job interview, etc., etc. And twice she brought along with her a little boy. This little boy looked undernourished and scared, and he sat silently next to Joyce without saying a word or making eye contact with anyone. Rhea Mattis said, quote, "He didn't speak, but he definitely looked at what was happening. He was very, very attentive. He followed everything actively, but didn't say anything at all." End quote. Detectives brought this new information about the orange shorts back to Joyce. So basically, they were like, hey, your daughters were seen wearing these shorts in Germany. Like, we have evidence that these may be the same shorts Adam was wearing. And so Joyce admitted, yes, I did purchase a pair of orange shorts along with the other Kids and Company clothing, but I no longer have those shorts. And when the police were like, well, where are they? She claimed she'd left them behind in her flat in Glasgow. Well, the police had already gone through Joyce's flat in Glasgow, which had not been re-rented and still contained any belongings she'd left behind. They'd collected and processed everything, and there were no orange shorts among those belongings. When Joyce was presented with this, she switched her story up and claimed that she'd left the shorts behind at her place in Hamburg. But the police had already gone through that flat as well. There were no orange shorts. Finally, Joyce settled on her final shorts story, claiming that she had given the shorts to a friend of hers in Hamburg who had been deported shortly thereafter. So, sorry, police, you probably won't be able to track down this woman to confirm my story. By this point, the police were sure that the orange shorts Joyce had purchased, the ones seen being worn by her daughter, were the very same shorts that Adam had been dressed in after his murder. However, they were not able to prove that Joyce had committed any crime, and so they were forced to release her. What happened next has raised a lot of eyebrows and triggered some rumors of a conspiracy or cover-up. So in December of 2002, the detectives on Adam's case were contacted by the Home Office. So the Home Office is a department of the United Kingdom government, which is responsible for immigration, security, and law and order. And the Home Office told the officers that Joyce was being deported and sent back to Nigeria since it had been discovered she was living in the country illegally and she'd committed a lot of welfare fraud. The detectives begged the Home Office to wait. Don't send her back yet. We still have questions. She's an integral part of this investigation, but they were told that Joyce either had to be charged with a crime or she was getting sent back. And since all they had was circumstantial evidence, the police had to step aside. Now, some people say it's odd that knowing the police were hot on the trail and getting closer to connecting Joyce with Adam, the the Home Office would be in such a rush to get her out of the country. Some people also say it's odd that the government chartered a large private jet at great expense to deliver Joyce back to her home country. The previous client who had used this same jet was rock star Phil Collins. So that's kind of unprecedented. That's out of the ordinary. The government won't usually charter an entire private jet to send one person back to their country. It does seem as if the government went to great pains to make sure that Joyce was hustled out as soon as possible, possibly so that she would not be available to detectives if they had more questions. Did someone high up in the government know what Joyce was involved in? Were they involved as well, and that was why they wanted to make sure she would not be around to reveal any secrets that might implicate a person or persons who were involved in the governing body of the United Kingdom? Sounds like a stretch, right? But human trafficking, it's a profitable business. And it wouldn't be the first time someone in government or law enforcement was caught with their pants down, so to speak. Like I said, it was considered unprecedented the way Joyce was flown back to Nigeria. And Detective Nick Chalmers accompanied her on the flight, on the private jet, hoping she would maybe let her guard down, reveal more, but she did not. I feel like he definitely should have poured her a couple drinks, like 1, 2, 3 rum and cokes, loosen her up a little bit, get her tongue moving. But I don't know. Maybe he tried that. It's a private jet. Anything goes. But Joyce did not reveal any other information. And almost as soon as she arrived back in Nigeria, she dropped off the map for some time. And law enforcement officials could not locate her. With Joyce currently out of reach, police turned their attention to the 2 men she had been affiliated with, Samuel Onjaihovi and Kingsley Ojo. At the end of 2002, detectives tracked Kingsley Ojo to a flat in London, but when they got there, the place was empty. However, it was very clear that someone had just been there. There was still food laid out on the table for a meal, and the food was still warm, and a window in the bedroom had been left wide open, suggesting that Ojo had climbed through it to escape when the police came knocking at his door. During a search of his residence, police found a video depicting a man being beheaded in a ritual murder. They also found multiple forged documents, along with envelopes that contained a sandy substance. Once tested, this substance was found to be a mixture of different things, ingredients that were eerily similar to the concoction found in Adam's intestines, and it contained quartz grains that could only be found in a Nigerian river. They also found what was referred to as a bizarre voodoo artifact in the form of a rat's skull with a nail shoved through it and black thread wrapped around it. The search was on for Kingsley Ojo, but he would turn up during a completely separate police investigation. On July 29, 2003, over 200 law enforcement agencies raided 9 London addresses and arrested 21 people, most of them of Nigerian descent, who were suspected of being involved with human trafficking and immigration offenses. Police believed the suspects were responsible for bringing children and adults from West Africa to the United Kingdom via Europe, which is the exact route that brought Adam from Benin City to London. Commander Andy Baker told the media that all the suspects would be tested to see if their DNA was a match to Adam's because he believed there was a very strong connection between these people and what had happened to Adam, especially considering that many of those arrested admitted to knowing Joyce and her husband Samuel, and many of the people arrested were originally from Benin City. Detective Will O'Reilly said, quote, "We are pretty confident that we have a group of individuals who would have trafficked Adam into the country." End quote. O'Reilly also said that during these raids of these different homes, some interesting substances had been found, including clay and soils, as well as animal skulls with nails shoved through them, and different sorts of mixtures and potions. Among those arrested during these raids was 35-year-old Kingsley Ojo, who, as it turns out, was an important and high-up figure in a major human trafficking ring operating out of multiple countries. He, along with others, had been responsible for kidnapping and smuggling Nigerian citizens into Europe, where they would then be forced to work in brothels or as domestic slaves, or they would be used for benefit fraud. So this guy's the worst, okay? Like scum of the earth level bad. The worst. Excuse my language, but he is a piece of shit. First of all, surprise, surprise, Kingsley Ojo was not his real name. And honestly, we don't even know what his real name is because he used at least, 12 or 13 different aliases. We do know that he entered Britain in 1999 with false papers under the name Musa Kamara, claiming he was from Sierra Leone seeking asylum. Then this dude started dating a woman named Barbara Bourne, a 45-year-old who lived in Tottenham. So when Ojo found out that his new lover had lost her son, Kieran, shortly after his birth in 1979, he stole Kieran's birth certificate and used it to successfully get a driver's license and a passport under that name with his picture. Then for the next year, he traveled between Naples and London, bringing Nigerians into the country on these cheap airline flights and then selling them to the highest bidder. So once again, let's go back to what was found in Joyce's flat, tons and tons of airline tickets. Once in custody, police found out that Kingsley Ojo was not from Sierra Leone, but from Benin City in Nigeria, the same place both Adam and Joyce had come from. Yet, Kingsley Ojo said he did not know Adam or Joyce, even though his number had been in her phone and her number had been in his. He also said that the strange items that police had found in his flat, like the powdery substance in the envelopes and a videotape of a man being ritually murdered, those things, they weren't his. They'd actually belonged to a different man who'd been renting a room in his flat. Kingsley Ojo was hit with 2 charges of using forged travel documents as well as 2 charges for human trafficking, and he was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Now, during his trial, Kingsley Ojo's lawyer offered a deal. His client would plead guilty to some of the charges if others were dropped. And before giving out the sentence, Judge Neil Stewart said, quote, "I'm satisfied your continued presence would be to the detriment of this country, and I make a recommendation that you be deported upon your release from prison." End quote. But for some reason, before being brought to prison, Ojo was given, I believe, over 10 days to sort of like get his affairs in order. Luckily, the police believed that he was cocky enough to continue his legal activities during this period, and they were right. He was followed to an Italian brothel in Brescia, a place which forced underage girls to perform sex work. It was discovered that this brothel acted as a holding station for trafficked victims, a place they would be kept safe and away from prying eyes before they could be sent on to whatever their next purpose was. However, many of the children who ended up in this brothel were never allowed to leave. It was sort of a deal that the owners of the brothel had with the traffickers. Like, yeah, you can use our place to, like, hide these people and these children, but we get our pick. We get our pick of the people and children you bring us, and whichever ones we want, they stay here, and they work at the brothel. These were children sometimes as young as 6. And 2 young Nigerian girls who were rescued from the brothel told authorities that they were from Benin City. And before being brought to Italy, they'd been led into a chamber. This chamber was draped all in orange fabric. They were then fed potions that made them feel funny, and they were told that they would be killed if they revealed any of the cult's secrets or if they asked anybody for help. So here we have a connection between Kingsley Ojo, human trafficking, and the black coat eyes of the devil guru Maharaj. We also have a connection between Joyce and Kingsley Ojo, and we have a connection between Joyce and Adam. So while Kingsley Ojo was being held in prison at Brixton, informants claimed to witness him performing what they called juju ceremonies for other inmates, and these other inmates both feared and respected Kingsley Ojo. We're going to leave Ojo for a little bit so that we're not jumping around too much in the timeline, and we're going to discover a little bit more about Joyce's estranged husband, Samuel Onojihovi. The search for answers to what had happened to Adam was happening 24/7 for several years. Each time a person from Nigeria was arrested in London, they would be questioned about Adam. They would also be questioned about Joyce, Kingsley Ojo, and Samuel, and one day this paid off. A Nigerian man who was arrested on unrelated charges was shown a picture of Samuel, and he claimed to know the man, but he wasn't going by the name Samuel. He was using a fake name and living in Dublin, Ireland. Now, it turned out that Samuel was already wanted by German authorities, where he'd been living for a time under the name Ibrahim Kaded. He'd been sentenced to 7 years in prison in March of 2001 for human trafficking and forgery, but he had been released on bail, at which point he completely vanished. So remember, Samuel is supposed to be Joyce's husband, and she claimed he was some high-up figure in that cult and that he took part in the ritual murders of 11 children, including his own son. Detectives traveled to Dublin and raided the home of Samuel and his new wife. He admitted to police that he was a witch doctor, but he denied knowing anything about Adam. He also said that he did not know Joyce, even though they were legally married, and the police literally had a videotape of Samuel marrying Joyce. And Samuel also said he didn't know Kingsley Ojo, but when the police searched through his home, they found a notebook in which he had written about Kingsley Ojo. It was discovered that Samuel had arrived in Ireland in 2001 with a heavily pregnant woman he claimed was his wife, and he'd been living under different fake names. But he was also tracked back to several different residences in Germany and London, so he'd been traveling extensively, just like Joyce and Kingsley Ojo. And you know where Samuel was from? Benin City. And I would say let's put a pin in Samuel and come back to him later, but there's literally nothing else I could find on this man. There's reports about him getting arrested. There's reports that the police were going to test him to see if he was Adam's father, but I can't find the results of that DNA test anywhere, and I don't know what happened to Samuel or where he went when he was released from a German prison. Basically, the detectives on Adam's case had nothing on Samuel besides Joyce's statement that he'd been a cult leader who murdered kids, but that wasn't enough, obviously, to charge him with anything. So he most likely got released, stole someone else's identity again, and he's living happily in some country, continuing on with his evil deeds, while his 2 daughters are being cared for by foster parents in Scotland. In February of 2003, the investigators on Adam's case put in a request with the Home Office for Joyce to be returned to London so they could ask her some more questions. But the Nigerian authorities were unable to locate her, so once again, a small group of detectives traveled to West Africa to sort of smoke her out, see if they could get her to come out. But they found out from the British High Commission in Lagos that Joyce had been reaching out to them, the commission, and she was trying to get some news about her daughters, who had been left in foster care in Scotland when she'd been deported. She made an appointment with the British High Commission, and when she arrived, she was promptly taken into custody and questioned by the Nigerian authorities and the London detectives. Joyce's statement from February of 2003 is as follows. She said she was a member of the cult between the years 1994 and 2002. She left because things were getting a little too evil for her. This cult had practiced black sorcery. Her husband Samuel had been the messiah, and she'd been the organizer. What kind of things does the organizer of a black sorcery cult do? Like, are you arranging bake sales? Are you scheduling movie nights? Collecting clothes for the homeless? What do you think she's up to as the organizer of a black sorcery cult? I don't know if you picked up on my sarcasm, but I don't think that it was bake sales and clothing collections. Joyce claimed she was too afraid to say any more because her husband and his cult had followers all over the world, including Germany and London, and she once again repeated that her husband was responsible for the ritual murders of multiple children. But when she was asked specifically about Adam, she at first said she knew nothing about his death. She would then revise her statement, saying, quote, "I know the child was murdered in Lewisham. I don't know where the head and limbs are. I think the boy was sacrificed because his parents had been brainwashed by the Maharaji's teachings." End quote. That was it. They couldn't do anything else. Joyce had committed no crimes in Nigeria, so she could not be arrested or charged with anything, and the detectives could not force her to return with them to London. In August of 2005, Adam was finally laid to rest in an unmarked grave in South Wark Cemetery, really not far from where his body had been pulled from the river. And the case stalled for several years with no new leads and no one willing to reveal any information. But in 2007, Kingsley Ojo was released from prison, and instead of being deported, he was given the opportunity to stay in London if he pinky promised to help the police track down the people responsible for Adam's murder. Detective Will O'Reilly said that he was sure Ojo and Joyce were connected, and he'd most likely been the one who helped her get Adam into the UK, so they were willing to work with him if it led them to the truth. Unfortunately, Ojo was like, "Yeah, guys, I'm going to help you. We're going to tackle this together. Gumshoe detectives." All he did for a year was provide them with loads of false information, false leads, as he continued to run his trafficking operation for a year. And then one day he just vanished. He just vanished and he was never seen again. In the spring of 2008, London Tonight correspondent Ronk Phillips was contacted by the brother of Joyce Ozajide. His name was Victor, and he told Ronk Phillips that Joyce wanted to sit down and allow herself to be interviewed. Now, Phillips is of Nigerian descent. Her parents came from the capital city of Lagos, and she'd grown up visiting there all her life. So she knew that if Adam was from Nigeria, his killers likely were as well. She was very familiar with the superstitions, the religions, the rituals, the culture. Apparently, shortly before this contact was made, Joyce had talked to Nigerian police, and she'd told them that she had actually been caring for a young boy while she had lived in Germany, and she had dressed him in orange shorts that had belonged to her daughter. So Ronk flew to Lagos with a few members of the task force so that she could talk to Joyce. But when they got there, they were informed that Joyce had been suffering greatly from mental instability, and she'd recently had a nervous breakdown. So the Nigerian police advised against any kind of interview as it might upset Joyce's already fragile mental state. Everyone was obviously very disappointed. They had thought they were finally going to get some answers 6 years after Adam was discovered in the Thames, but they met another dead end, and it would be another 3 years before Joyce would be ready and willing to talk again. In 2011, Joyce's brother Victor, who was a journalist himself, he said that Joyce had recovered and was willing to meet with Ronk Phillips again. So Phillips went to Joyce's house to interview her, and she said that Joyce seemed nervous throughout their time together and slightly aggressive.
I wanted to speak to her and hopefully get some answers.
With my sister, Joyce.
When I eventually meet Joyce, she appears confused and unsure of herself. This may be due to the medication she's taking.
After some initial questions, the new information began to spill out. Joyce said she'd been given a little boy to look after while she had been living in Germany, and she'd done this as a favor to a friend of hers, the boy's mother, who was being deported. Joyce showed Ronk a picture that she had, a picture of her 2 daughters standing next to a little boy. When she was asked if this little boy was Adam, Joyce said yes, but his name was not Adam. It was Ik Pamwosa. Allegedly, Joyce herself had to hand this boy off to someone else when it was her time to leave Germany and travel to London to seek asylum, and she claims she gave him to a man named Bawa. After she was settled in London, Joyce claims she called Bawa to see how the boy was doing, and she was informed that he had died. Ronk Phillips asked Joyce if she knew who had killed Adam, and Joyce replied, "I am a mother. I have children. I cannot kill someone's child." She did admit that the group of people who had been involved with his death were also involved with the cult she had run with and run from, a cult that her husband was a high priest in and she was an organizer of. Joyce said they had used the boy for a ritual in the water.
So the baby that you gave to Bawa, what was the name of that baby?
Ikmomosa, baby Adam. They also call him, his native name is Ikmomosa.
Is this the baby you looked after? Is
Yes.
this the baby that you gave to Bawa?
Yes.
Then this is the boy you looked after for a short time as well.
In Germany for 1 year. I've now traveled with my 2 children to Britain to seek refugee there. So after that, when I get to Britain, I now found Bawa. Where is the Ikmomosa? Then he said he's dead.
Well, you say you didn't have anything to do with the killing.
No, I'm a mother. I have children. I can't kill somebody's child.
Do you know who killed Ikpamosa?
Ikmomosa. Yes. No, I don't know the group of people. They use him for ritual in the water. But I gave Ikmomosa to Bawa. Listen carefully, please. I gave Ikmomosa to Bawa. And when I got to Scotland, Britain, they said Ikmomosa is dead.
How old was the boy that you looked after?
6 years.
And how was he as a boy? What kind of boy was he?
He's a lively boy. He's a very nice boy, and he's also intelligent.
Are you willing to talk to the police now?
Yes, if they come.
And are you willing to tell the police that this is the boy that you handed over to Bawa?
Yes, if the police came.
Let me just be clear now that this little boy could well be the boy
Yes.
whose torso was taken out of the Thames.
Yes.
Now, this was a major breakthrough because we now knew 2 names we hadn't before. Ikpamosa, which was supposedly Adam's real name, and Bawa, the man that Joyce claimed to have given Ikamposa to. And we finally had a picture of Adam, not just this same faceless and limbless photo that had been used to identify him or signify him before, this sad partial body dressed in sad little orange shorts. But we had his face, his real face allegedly, the face of an adorable and innocent and sweet child that everyone who had been following Adam's story since he was pulled from the Thames could look at and wonder, what kind of boy was he? Was he full of energy, bouncing around all the time, laughing as loud as he could? Did he like music? Was he more introverted like the social worker from Germany claimed? What was his favorite game to play? Did he have a little stuffy he liked to sleep with at night? Did he have any idea what was happening to him as he was passed from adult to adult without any explanation? The press began to report that the mystery of Adam's identity had been solved, but the police in London were less inclined to close the case. Joyce had lied to them and everyone else so many times. She constantly had a new story, and she had many times been purposely misleading and uncooperative. Why did she suddenly want to spill all the tea now? Was she no longer afraid of the cult that had killed her son, that had caused her to run away, that had caused her to hide out in multiple countries so that she would be safe from them? Or was she telling another story? Maybe a story that was intended and formulated to mislead the police and throw them off the scent of Adam's true killers. In 2013, Joyce again reached out and said she wanted to talk some more. This time she contacted the BBC, and with Detective Nick Chalmers in tow, they flew to Benin City. Now, by this time, Nick Chalmers was already retired, but he was so very invested in this case and in finding a way to actually close the case with Adam's real name, real face, parents, etc. So he was compelled to go there with the BBC so he could talk to Joyce himself. Now, suddenly the story was different again. Now Adam's real name was Patrick or Harbour, but he was not the boy in the picture she'd shown Ronk Phillips. That had been a misunderstanding. The boy in the picture was actually named Danny, and he was a son of a friend of hers. So now we no longer have a picture of Adam to look at and to wonder who he was and what his life was like. And Joyce has changed her story again. And then Joyce is shown a picture of Kingsley Ojo, and when she saw it, she perked up and she said, "This is Bawa. This man in the picture that you're showing me, that's Bawa, the man I gave Adam to before he died." Now remember, Kingsley Ojo was this mysterious figure who kept finding himself connected to this case. He was running a successful human trafficking operation. He was stealing the identities of dead children in order to further his business. He was the scum of the earth. But his phone number was in Joyce's phone, and her phone number was in his phone. And Joyce was known to frequent a flat that was in his name. And when the police went through his flat in 2002, they found a video depicting a ritual sacrifice by way of beheading, as well as some packets with a powdery mixture inside, a mixture of bone, sand, and flecks of gold, sand that can only be found in a certain river in Nigeria. And all of this was eerily similar to the contents found in Adam's stomach. When Nick Chalmers heard Joyce look at a picture of Ojo and call him Bawa, he felt justified for the first time in like 7 years, because Kingsley Ojo was a fish they just couldn't catch. And if they did catch him, he would wriggle and slither until he was off the line, escaping their grasp, diving back into the depths of the ocean, never to be seen again. Chalmers said, quote, "I've always suspected his involvement, and now for the very first time, we have a witness who is categorically saying that Kingsley was involved," end quote. Is she a reliable witness, though? We'll discuss that in a minute. So obviously the BBC are going to try to talk to Kingsley Ojo, but they can't find him. They were able to get a message to him from some third-party source, and they got a message back, and basically Kingsley Ojo refused to talk to anybody. He said he had no idea who Joyce was, he had no idea who Adam was, and he had nothing to do with anything. Nick Chalmers and the BBC went from Benin City to Germany so they could track down this Danny person and get confirmation on whether he actually was the little boy in the picture. So they did find Danny, and by that point he'd grown into a young man, a handsome and smartly dressed young man, might I add. Look at that peacoat with the black and purple scarf. Go off, Danny. Go off. Anyways, Danny looked at the picture, and he recognized it right away. He was like, yes, this is a picture of me. I'm familiar with this picture. That was me as a child. And he was shocked when the police told him that this picture of him as a little boy had been broadcast on television shows all over the world and had appeared in publications from one corner of the earth to the other, because everyone had thought that this was a picture of Adam. While in Hamburg, the police also met a man near the apartment that Joyce had lived in while she was supposedly caring for little Adam in Germany. The man said that he had lived in that area for many, many years. He remembered Joyce, and he also remembered a little boy who'd been staying with her for some time. The man said, quote, "The boy was running around, he was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he was jumping all over this couch that they had and drawing on it," end quote. But this big movement in the case, Joyce finally talking, sort of identifying Kingsley Ojo, it would be the last. Kingsley Ojo refused to talk to anybody. He disappeared. We don't know where he's at. And although the Metropolitan Police still have this case open and they regularly reach out to the public for information, it's gone completely cold. September of 2021 was the 20-year anniversary of Adam becoming known to London and the world. And many on the police force are frustrated by the lack of answers still to this day. Kate Kieran, a homicide detective with the Met Police, she feels it's very sad that Adam does not have a name or a story. She said she understands why people may not have wanted to come forward in the early days. Maybe they were afraid, maybe they were loyal, but over 20 years, allegiances and relationships must have changed. Kate said, quote, "We implore them to be bold and come forward if they know something, so we can finally deliver justice," end quote. Retired Detective Nick Chalmers is still haunted by Adam and the lack of answers, and he told the BBC, quote, "This was an innocent young child. There are people responsible for his death who have not been brought to justice. 20 years on, I wish I knew the identity of Adam and his parents. In reality, He's a missing child from a family who probably don't know he's buried here in London, end quote. But the fight goes on, right? Always forward, never back, because Adam's case is so unfortunate. And it's so sad, but there are other children out there who need protecting so they don't end up like Adam. And Adam's case did something special for the police in London, I feel. It taught them things that they hadn't known before. They were able to actually travel to these countries, talk to the experts, the Sangomas, the actual people who lived through these atrocities every day. And due to that, they were given something invaluable: knowledge, information to be used in the case of something similar popping up in their cases, in their investigations in their country. And there have been plenty of other cases like Adam's, cases of human sacrifice, cases of adults accusing children of being witches and then torturing them or killing them to get the devil out.
Dr. Richard Hoskins studies ritualistic killings, in particular the so-called muti murders of young children, whose body parts are used to make medicine. At today's conference, he warned the police that it's something that may be increasing across Europe.
I think it's inevitable that we will see more of these sorts of cases in Europe. Thankfully, they're going to be pretty rare, I think. They happen in Africa. We know about that. They're fairly rare, but with more Africans living in Europe, there are always going to be some deviants, people who deviate, and yes, we're going to see some more cases.
The boy known as Adam had been circumcised, a sign he might have come from West Africa. There have been cases there where children are murdered in the belief that their death will empower the killers.
This is a deviation from African traditional religious belief, just as Satanism is a deviation from Christianity, and it's that much of a deviation. But it's all about empowerment. They've used probably a particular deity, invoked a particular deity, to empower themselves. This killing is an appeasement to this deity, and it's for empowerment. They're drawing power into themselves.
One of the challenges we faced in the West is that we always demand scientific evidence. We want to be able to reason and rationalize everything that happens within our world. And this conference, for example, is seeking to do that. But the fact is that 2/3 of the world don't see things that way. What we tend to do is, the way they see things is that the spiritual encroaches on every part of their daily lives. And we've got to be careful that we don't see that as being harmful and dangerous.
Now, this is a whole nother can of worms. It could be an entire video on its own, so I'll only touch on a few examples to illustrate. But understand, what I'm telling you is the literal tip of the iceberg. In 2005, the same year Adam was buried in Southwark Cemetery, a confidential report written by the Metropolitan Police was leaked to the BBC, and it described sacrifice and abuse of children in African communities and African churches around the UK. The investigation had uncovered that young boys and girls were being smuggled into the country for the purposes of human sacrifice and other purposes too. One of the findings suggested that some of these children were given to men who were sick from HIV or sick with HIV because these men believed and had been told that having sex with a child would cleanse them of their disease. And then obviously we know what happened to the kids after they were used. Law enforcement officials had been able to infiltrate and convince some of the members of these churches to talk a little, and they were told that uncircumcised boys are the most desirable since they are believed to be unblemished, and their blood creates the most powerful spells. The police were also told that most of this information was coming from the heads of the church, the holy men themselves, who sat on a pulpit and preached to their congregation every week, shouting out that God speaks to them. God speaks to the people through the pastor or the priest, and God lets him know when a child is possessed by demons. The report said, quote, "A number of pastors maintain that God speaks to them and lets them know when someone is possessed. After much debate, they acknowledged that children labeled as possessed are in danger of being beaten by their families. However, they would not accept that they played a major role in inciting such violence," end quote. And I'm going to get to examples of what this report is speaking of. Family members who torture, abuse, and murder children that are often related to them because they are told by somebody in the church that this child is possessed or practicing witchcraft or has the devil in them. And sometimes they're not even told that directly. They're just taught it every week in church, and so they see it everywhere they look. This report also stated that law enforcement had found out that children were being sold to traffickers on the streets of cities such as Lagos for under $10 sometimes. And then they were smuggled into the UK, where they arrived with false papers and adults claiming to be their parents, hoping that having a child or two in tow would increase their chances of being granted asylum, which it does. And once they are in, the children, they're expendable at that point. They're not actually related to the people who use them to get into the country, so they're passed on to people like Kingsley Ojo. But as I touched on previously, children being used for human sacrifice is a major issue. But so are these men who call themselves God's messengers, having the balls to point at a child, an innocent child, and tell this child's family that they are possessed, or even worse, a witch. Victoria Climbby was born on the Ivory Coast in 1991. When she was 7, she was sent to live with her Aunt Marie in Paris. Apparently, Marie told her sister and Victoria's mother, listen, I'm going to bring her with me. Get her out of Africa. She'll have a Western education. She's going to have everything that she can have here. So just trust me and give her to me. But when Aunt Marie was pursued by French authorities because of fraud dealing with benefit payments, she fled, taking Victoria with her, and they ended up in London. And at this point, Victoria became known by everyone around her as Anna, because that was the name on the passport that had been used to allow her to illegally enter the country. One day, Aunt Marie met a man, Carl Manning. They met him on a bus. Victoria and Aunt Marie met Carl Manning on a bus. They didn't speak a word of English, and within a few weeks, both Marie and Victoria were living in this man's house, and Carl was Marie's boyfriend. Carl Manning began to abuse Victoria, and she was admitted to the hospital several times for, resulting injuries from the abuse, but her Aunt Marie told the doctors that the young girl had done this to herself, or it was an accident. Little Victoria was forced by her aunt and Carl to sleep in the bathtub every night. She was being physically, sexually, and emotionally abused by the two adults in her life, and on February 24th, 2000, she was rushed to the hospital and declared dead. Later, Manning told the police that Victoria was possessed by the devil, and he actually told the police that beating her over and over again, it only reinforced that belief. He said, quote, "You could beat her and she would not cry at all. She could take pain like anything," end quote. And then we have Christie Bammu, a 15-year-old boy who was drowned in a bathtub during an exorcism in Newham, England on Christmas Day, 2010. This murder was at the end of a multiple week stretch of constant abuse at the hands of Christie's aunt and uncle. Christie and his siblings were visiting with this aunt and uncle in Paris. Their names were Eric Bikubi and Magalia Bammu. And apparently Eric Bikubi accused the children of bringing witchcraft into his home, and he began beating Christie and Christie's two sisters. And he even forced other children, like their own children from the neighborhood, to come and take part in these daily beatings as well. Now, Christie's two sisters finally confessed to being witches after this torture because they just wanted it to stop. But Christie kind of held on a little bit longer. He kept saying, I'm not a witch, I'm not a witch, I'm innocent, I'm not doing anything wrong. And then he wet himself from fear and pain, and then things escalated. Later in court, Christie's sister Kelly said, quote, "It was as if they were obsessed by witchcraft. They decided we had come there to kill them," end quote. The pair eventually took these 3 children to the London area where the abuse and torture continued. Christie Bammu was attacked with knives. He was beaten with sticks and metal bars. He was hit with ceramic floor tiles, bottles, even a hammer and chisel by both his aunt, Magalia Bammu, and her husband, Eric. Finally, they put him in the bathtub to cleanse him, and he drowned. Eric Bibuke was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years, and his wife and Christie's aunt, she was given 25 years. On October 8th, 2014, a multi-agency benefit was held to raise awareness of child abuse linked to faith or belief. Detective Terry Sharp of Scotland Yard addressed the gathered crowd, saying, quote, "Abuse linked to belief is a horrific crime, which is condemned by people of all cultures, communities, and faith. A number of high-profile investigations brought the issue of ritual abuse and witchcraft into the headlines, but it is important that professionals are clear about the signs to look for. Families or carers genuinely believe that the victim has been completely taken over by the devil or an evil spirit, which is often supported by someone who, within the community, has portrayed themselves as an authority on faith or belief. Regardless of the beliefs of the abusers, child abuse is child abuse. Our role is to safeguard children, not challenge beliefs. We investigate crimes against children, but our main aim is to prevent abuse in the first place. This is a hidden crime, and we can only prevent it by working in partnership with the community," end quote. So I told you just a few cases of this, but there's thousands more. Probably even more than that, more that have never been discovered, because these children are smuggled into the country with different identities, and they usually fall through the cracks. There's nobody there to miss them when they disappear. That's where we're at. In conclusion, I feel that Joyce knew way more than she was saying. Look at her apartment in Germany when she was collecting money from the country that had provided her asylum. She was living it up with flat screen televisions, leather recliners. She had access to several flats throughout Germany, Scotland, England, somewhere in her name, so that means she was paying for them or someone was paying the rent for her. She had all these airplane tickets in her flat, airplane tickets like the ones Kingsley Ojo used to bring children from Italy into the UK. She was very familiar with all these rituals. Basically her story is she gave Adam to this Bawa man who is, supposed to be Kingsley Ojo, and she didn't know what Kingsley Ojo was going to do. She didn't know that he was going to use Adam as a ritual sacrifice. And then she called him and found out, and she was stunned. I don't believe that. I think that because she knew who Kingsley Ojo was, and I think it's bullshit that she's trying to pretend oh, Kingsley Ojo, Bawa, what? Oh, they're the same person? I'm stunned. No, you had Kingsley Ojo's name and number in your phone. You visited the flat that was in his name in London. You knew who he was and you knew what he did. You put the orange shorts on Adam. So I definitely feel like she knows more. And we'll probably never find out what actually happened unless, there's some sort of deathbed confession. But I doubt it. Because honestly, the police believe that Adam was probably sacrificed by this cult who's also connected to this human trafficking ring. And Adam was sacrificed in order to give the traffickers the power to evade law enforcement. And this is very common, actually. It's going to bring me back to the Mark Kilroy case that I've been investigating. But in the Mark Kilroy case, you've got drug smugglers and stuff in Mexico who are doing these same kinds of rituals. And they're doing it because they think that it's going to make them invisible to law enforcement and allow them to sort of just do all their illegal activities and not get caught. So that's what Adam was killed for. Adam was killed so that these horrible people could continue bringing more children into Europe and the UK to be killed or abused or used. And it's horrible. It's horrible. But I really am looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this whole case in the comment section. Hit like if you liked the video. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out my podcast, Crime Weekly, that I co-host every week with Derek Levasser, retired police detective, Big Brother winner. Our podcasts go up on audio every Friday and on video on our YouTube channel the following Wednesday. Links are in the description box. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm sad that Halloween is over, but I've got some stuff in store for you for the coming months. So have no fear. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay spooky. Always remember Halloween. It will live on forever, and I will see you very soon.
Would a levee don't break now, and the bottle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood.